Well, welcome everybody to the day after my birthday, also known as June 27th, also known as Sunday, also known as week 4 of our series, Life on Purpose. And by the way, it's not too late to get me a gift for my birthday, even though it's been a few days. And it's also never too late for you and for me to begin to live a life on purpose. I hope you enjoyed that little connection there. And if we're going to live a life on purpose, if we're going to live a life of meaning and significance, we've got to allow ourselves to ask and respond to what I want to call a pesky question. And by pesky, I mean bothersome. And here it is, right here. Here's the pesky question. What breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? It's pesky because it forces us to feel something. It forces us maybe to look at things we don't want to look at or to feel things that we don't want to feel. It forces us to actually care. And if you're anything like me, and I'm guessing that you are a little bit at least like me, you're at that season right now after like a year and a half of the stuff we've gone through. If you're anything like me, you're tired or you're traumatized by the last 16 months. And you don't really want to care. You don't really want to be bothered. You don't really want to be disturbed. And if you feel that way, I just want to say, I get it. For many of us, we just want to turn down the noise. We want to close our eyes to the need out there. And we want to walk away from whatever it is. Now, let me just say simply this, because I need to say this. There's nothing wrong with silence and solitude. There's nothing wrong with getting away from the crowd and the noise and the clamor and all the things that go on. Jesus did that. He got away from the crowds, and we need to as well. In fact, I'm going to be spending a lot of July all by myself in my fishing kayak, okay? But please hear this. Please, please, please hear this. What's not okay is for us to become apathetic. What's not okay is indifference. And what I've learned to be true in my life is simply this. As exhaustion goes up, empathy goes down. And that's not okay. What we have to guard against is living our lives on DND, do not disturb. And again, we're tempted right now to live our lives on don't disturb me. I need my alone time. But we cannot fall and live in this kind of a mode in life. Why? And the very simple answer is this. We can't follow Jesus on do not disturb. Jesus made that very clear. In fact, Matthew, one of his followers, records Jesus saying these words in the gospel according to Matthew. Then Jesus said to his disciples, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. You must take up your cross and follow me. In other words, there's nothing apathetic. There's no indifference anywhere in those verses. We can't follow Jesus on do not disturb. It involves denial. It involves sacrifice. It involves tuning into the needs, listening to the cries of our world, and stepping in to whatever it is. And maybe you're wondering right now, well, why would anyone want to do that? Why would I want to take up my cross? Why would I want to, deny myself and follow this Jesus person? And the answer is significance. Not just because he's worthy of me serving and following and whatever that means, but the other reason is I find purpose when I deny myself. I find meaning and significance. Purpose is always found south of the border of the land of me, the land of life's all about me. When I step out of that and start denying myself, I find meaning and I find purpose. And so we're in a series about purpose. And let me just say this about purpose. Purpose is found when I join with Jesus, when I partner with Jesus in trying to right that which is wrong in our world. That's where I find purpose. When I put my hand up and say, okay, Jesus, I'm going to partner with you in taking that which is wrong and helping to make it right. In fact, Jesus, and again, Matthew records this great prayer that Jesus taught us, his disciples, to say. Jesus says, pray this way. Pray, may your will, Father in heaven, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now think about this. We've probably prayed this like a million times, right? Have you ever thought about what you're praying here? We're actually praying for what's happening in heaven to come and happen here on this earth. The implication is simply this, that what's happening on earth isn't always in alignment with God's will, with God's ways. That there are things happening here on this planet of ours that aren't right, that aren't according to the will of our Father. And so Jesus wants us to pray that what's happening in heaven right now will happen here on earth. And I don't have to convince you that what's happening on earth right now isn't right. Just open your eyes and look around. You'll see a lot of things that aren't right, from injustice to racism to poverty to sickness to disease. We've got cancer. We got people who are infertile. We've got homelessness. We've got loneliness. We've got spiritual empathy. We've got broken, fractured families, and we've got all kinds of things that as we look and span our globe, we have to just know that those things break God's heart. And Jesus wants us to partner with him in righting those wrongs. And the way I summed all this up for you is right here on the screen. We are on earth. What's our purpose? We are on earth to bring a slice of heaven to earth. The earth is a big place, and we can't change the world. But what Jesus wants us to do is to be willing and available to change one little slice of our earth, to bring a little bit of what's happening in heaven right now down to our little corner or slice of the earth. Now, what does that look like? What does that mean? I mean, can you show me an example of someone who did that well, someone who allowed the pesky question, what breaks your heart, to move them to action? Yeah, I can. In fact, I can't wait to share with you one of my favorite characters in the entire Old Testament. In fact, I've done a whole series of messages on this character's life before, and I want to bring him back for just a few minutes today. His name is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is like the poster child for allowing his heart to be broken, for allowing himself to be bothered to the point where he did something about it and was used by God. Now, before we go into his story, I want to give you a little bit of a historical backdrop of where we find ourselves in Jewish history. So 586, for example, 586 BC, what happens? Well, the Babylonians come in to Jerusalem and they overtake God's people. They burn the city of Jerusalem. They burn down the temple, and they topple the protective wall around Jerusalem. And they not only did all of that, but the Babylonians then took into captivity tens of thousands of Jews. That's 586 BC. The next date I want to share with you is 530 BC, because what happens is the Persians come in and they overtake the Babylonians. And this was a good thing. And they allow the Jewish people who have been taken into captivity, they allow them to return back to Jerusalem. And according to history, 50,000 Jewish people returned to their homeland in Jerusalem, in the region of Judea. And they rebuild the temple. They rebuild the city of Jerusalem. But 90 years later, and this is going to take us to the next date, 440 BC, 90 years later, the protective wall around Jerusalem, for whatever reason, has not been rebuilt. And just so you know, in this ancient world, a city that didn't have a protective wall around it would be like, just think about this, the United States of America not having any military presence whatsoever. No Air Force, no Army, no Marines. Just think about that. That's what a city in this ancient world was like. And this is where we kind of pick up the story in 440 BC because a guy by the name of Nehemiah steps into the scene. He's a Jew serving a Persian king named Artaxerxes I. And what he does, as you can see right here, is he is the cup bearer to the king of Persia. It was a pretty big deal. It was a pretty big deal. In fact, what he did was simply this. Before wine would touch the king's lips, the cupbearer, i.e. Nehemiah, would take a sip, first of all, not to test its quality. No. To test whether or not it was poisoned. Yeah. In fact, you never had to ask a cupbearer, how was your day? Because if they came home, they had a good day. Yeah, and this is where we pick up the story with Nehemiah, the cupbearer to the king, hearing news that breaks his heart. We're going to pick it up in Nehemiah chapter 1. We're going to go to verse 1. In late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I, Nehemiah, this is Nehemiah writing this kind of out of his journal here. I was at the fortress of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came to visit with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity. Again, the Persians allowed them to come back to Jerusalem, and about how things were going in Jerusalem. They said to me, and here it is, things are not going well for those who return to the province of Judah. They are in great trouble and disgrace. Why? Well, the wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And Nehemiah writes these words, when I heard this, I sat down and I wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasted, and prayed to the God of heaven. I'm going to leave this slide up for just a moment because I want you to see there's like 4 vivid verbs here. I wept, he says. I mourned, I fasted, I prayed to the God of heaven. Now, right here, this is one of those like moments as I read the story of Nehemiah where this ordinary guy, this cupbearer, this ordinary guy becomes extraordinary. Why? Because he didn't close his eyes to the need in Jerusalem. He didn't tune out the voice, the cries of those people. He didn't walk away from what was going on. By the way, it was 800 miles away from him. He didn't just turn and say, that's too bad for them. No, he allows himself to feel. He weeps, he mourns, he fasts, he goes without food even, and he prays, and he prays, and he prays. In fact, for several months, like 4 months, all he does is pray. He goes to God before he takes action. He feels the pain of what they are experiencing, because you have to understand something, friends. Without this protective wall around Jerusalem, God's people were the laughing stock of the ancient world, and God's name was being mocked. And Nehemiah knows that, and that's why he is broken. He is broken. He is bothered by what he hears. And so like 4 months, he just prays and he prays. But then it's time, after praying, it's time for him to move, to act, to do something. He doesn't just go on social media and post hashtag pray for Jerusalem. Not that there's anything wrong with prayer, don't get me wrong. And there's nothing wrong with these hashtags that we're so infamous for doing. But no, he goes beyond the, hey, pray for Jerusalem. No, he decides it's time for him. In the position that he has as cupbearer to the king, it's time for him to approach King Artaxerxes with a request. And that's exactly what we see him doing as you turn to chapter 2 and go down with me to verse 2. Here's what he says. So the king asked me. He shows up in front of the king with a sad face. The king says, why are you looking so sad? You don't look sick to me. You must be deeply troubled. Then I was terrified. Now look at me for a second. The reason why he's terrified is, in this ancient world, you did not show up in front of the king with a sad face. Because if you showed up with a sad face, it was not just off with your head. I mean, you were dead. You were dead. This is like signing your death warrant. So he's terrified. He says, then I was terrified, but I replied, I replied, long live the king. How can I not be sad? For the city where my ancestors are buried is in ruins, and the gates have been destroyed by fire. And the king asked, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven. He's been praying for 4 months, and he prays again. With a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. And the king, and you can read the story on your own, the king grants him permission to go, the king gives him provision, and the king even provides protection for Nehemiah to go and begin the process of rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. And it's a fascinating story. He mobilizes people. There's all kinds of criticism. There's all kinds of pushback. There are enemies that try to stop him, opposition galore, discouragement, you name it. He faces it. But get this. According to Nehemiah chapter 6, and we're not going to go there, but you can go there if you want. According to Nehemiah chapter 6, 52 days after Nehemiah shows up, the wall around Jerusalem is rebuilt. 52 days. Think about this. For 90 years, it's been nothing but rubble. For 90 years, it's been just ruins. God's name mocked, God's people laughing stock of the ancient world. And then Nehemiah shows up. And 52 days later, the wall is rebuilt. All because a cupbearer has what we call a Popeye moment. Anybody remember this guy, Popeye the Sailor Man? Remember him? He had a girlfriend named Olive Oil. She was a real looker, you know. When she walked by, dogs would bark and construction workers would whistle. And her twiggy-like figure made Popeye the Sailor Man's heart go pitter-patter. But there was also this other character, the bad guy, named Brutus. Remember him, Brutus? He would always be trying to steal olive oil from Popeye. And it seemed like every single episode of this cartoon, it always came down to the same moment, Brutus grabbing olive oil, Popeye going to try to rescue his girlfriend Olive Oil, and then Brutus just pummeling Popeye the Sailor Man. And just when things look dark, just when all looks lost, Popeye would say the words that many of us still remember to this very day. He says these words, "That's all I can stands, and I can't stands no more." And right after he says these words, what does he do? He grabs a can of spinach and in one gulp, gulps it down, and then he morphs. His arms get to be like 4 times the size they were, and he saves the day. He saves olive oil from Brutus, and all is well again. By the way, when this TV show came out, like in the 1930s, spinach sales, not making this up, spinach sales went up 30% that year. So not only did Popeye save olive oil, he also saved the spinach industry. Now, here's the point I want to make, and this is what I want you to tune into this, because here's the truth. The world has changed right here through Popeye moments. The world is changed through Popeye moments. The world is changed when ordinary people allow their hearts to be broken by what breaks God's heart. The world is changed when ordinary people like you and ordinary people like me, when we allow ourselves to be bothered, when we allow ourselves to feel what God feels when God sees injustice or racism, when God sees someone who lost a loved one and they're lonely, when God sees families falling apart and fracturing, when God sees loneliness, when God sees people who are experiencing spiritual emptiness, when God sees, you fill in the blank. The world has changed when people like us say, as we look at those things that are broken in our world, when we say, that's all I can stands, and I can't stands no more. And when we fall on our knees and we pray, and then when we get up off our knees and do something to bring a slice of heaven down to this earth, friends, that is when the world changes. And that, in that moment, is when we find purpose and meaning and significance in our lives. So let me ask you, back to the pesky question. What breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? As you look around, as you look in your little corner of the world, do you see any broken down walls? Do you? Because Nehemiah did. And instead of shrugging his shoulders and says, oh, it's too bad about what they're dealing with over there, 800 miles from me, I'm in the palace, that's too bad about what they're experiencing. Instead of doing that, instead of shrugging his shoulders, he says, what if? What if? What if I go to the king? And what if I get permission to go and rebuild the wall around Jerusalem? Bill Wilson did. Bill Wilson said, hey, what if? What if? What if I come up with a program, like a 12-step program to help people who are wrestling with alcoholism? Mother Teresa did. She allowed her heart to be broken. She said, hey, what if? What if I go to Calcutta? And what if I minister to the lepers and the orphans there? Martin Luther King Jr. did. He allowed his heart to be broken. He said, hey, what if? What if? What if I start a movement so that someday my kids aren't judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character? What if? What if? And maybe you're thinking right now, Pastor Phil, those are great examples that you just gave, but hey, I am not Nehemiah. I am not Mother Teresa. I am not Bill Wilson. I am not Martin Luther King Jr. I'm Pastor Phil, I'm just an electrician. Pastor Phil, I'm just a plumber. Pastor Phil, I'm just a construction worker. Pastor Phil, I'm just a computer person. I'm just an accountant. I'm just a stay-at-home mom. Pastor Phil, I'm just a kid. Pastor Phil, I'm just a teenager. Pastor Phil, I'm just a senior citizen. Pastor Phil, I'm just a. And I hear you. I hear you. But for all of you, I'm just a people out there. For all of you, I have a word for you. I believe this is a word from the Lord for you. And here it is. Make yourself available. And God will make you capable. Make yourself available. And God, through his Holy Spirit, will make you capable. You see, God's not really looking for ability as much as God is looking for availability. And if you allow your heart to be broken by what breaks God's heart, as you step into that need, whatever it is, I believe that God will make you capable. The truth is, Crossroads Church is full of people who are making a difference, who are bringing a slice of heaven to their little corner of this world. We have people running marathons who aren't runners, who aren't athletic at all. And they're not running marathons because they're great athletes. They're running marathons because their hearts have been broken. Broken by the fact that in Africa, kids are dying left and right because they're drinking unclean water. And people are running marathons, raising money now to change that. We have people who gather at our campuses every week and serve. They serve in our kids ministry, or they serve in our youth ministry, and they do it not because they're experts in kids or experts with teenagers. No, they're doing it because they had a bad experience as a kid or a bad experience as a teen. And now they want to make sure that every kid who walks into Crossroads has a better experience. Someone who believes in them. someone who loves them, and someone who wants them to know that there's a God in heaven who is crazy about them. We have people leading small groups for couples going through infertility. Why? Because they went through it themselves, and they now want other people to be helped. We have people leading divorce care small groups and grief share small groups. We have people doing all kinds of ministry. Why? Because they want to help people, because they've gone through what they are now going through. And just recently, we had the privilege of sitting down with one of the ladies who goes to Crossroads, who has found purpose in the midst of her pain. And I want to share Holly's story with you right now.
On July 31st, I woke up and it was just a normal day. And I just kept feeling worse and worse throughout the day. Like by the time evening came, I just went up and went to bed. My husband worked evenings at that time. So when I heard him come home about 10 o'clock, I called him and told him to come upstairs. And I said, something is very wrong with me. And the next day I went to the urgent care because it was, of course, a Saturday. And they gave me pain medicine and told me they couldn't really help me. And I went to my regular doctor. He did a series of tests and couldn't figure me out. And those 13 months were so scary. At first we thought I had cancer. I felt like I was dying, so we totally expected that we were going to get horrible news. And then I just remember I would sit in the shower. I couldn't even stand in the shower. I would sit on my shower stool in the shower and have the water running so it wouldn't hurt my bones, just the force of the water. And I would play Lord, I Need You by Matt Maher, praying that I would find out what was wrong with me. It took 13 months, 17 doctors, a bone marrow biopsy, every scan you can imagine, every blood test you can imagine, to finally determine that I had Lyme disease. But then once I finally got diagnosed, I was so happy because I thought that it was something that could just be fixed and then I would be good again. I finally came to the realization that it was just something that I was going to be living with the rest of my life. I just decided that I didn't want this to happen to anybody else. I really felt like one of the reasons that this happened to me was that God knew that I would try to do something about it. So I felt a huge responsibility to raise awareness about what can happen if you get Lyme disease and it's not taken care of right away. So I made that my mission, and I started a nonprofit called Lyme Awareness Minnesota. I just thought about what do I know how to do, and putting on events is something that I know how to do. So I organized a big gala, and then the next day we had a Lyme awareness walk at the Mall of America, and we had over 400 people participating in that, and we raised over $100,000. If you just keep your eye on getting better and all of the positives that you still have in your life, that's what is a game changer. If you're going through something right now, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you just are feeling like the weight of the world is on your shoulders, or if you're facing a health battle like I did, I just want to encourage you to not stay there. When I couldn't cut my own food and I couldn't stand in the shower, I still had my wonderful family and my wonderful friends who kept checking on me. I had my church. And I know this sounds easier said than done, but if you cry out to Jesus in your pain, He can help you find a purpose in what's happening to you. And one of the best things that happened to me was when I realized that I could make a difference for other people. The last thing I want to say to anyone who's struggling is don't give up. Keep fighting to get better and ask God to use you. Just ask Him to use you and use what you're going through for a better purpose.
Wow, what a powerful, powerful story. And as I sat and listened to her share her story with us, I couldn't think, but it would have been so easy for Holly to wallow in self-pity. It would have been so easy for her to just become angry and shake her fist at God and say, why me, God, why me? But instead, what does Holly do? Instead of asking the why me question, what does Holly do? She asks the what now question. Okay, God, I've got this. It's horrible, but what now can I do to help others who maybe are going through it? Or what can I do now, God, to make sure that others are aware of Lyme disease? And it's this beautiful picture of purpose being birthed from a very painful place, a very painful womb. But she's changing a little corner of the world now. Holly is literally saving lives. Why? Because she was willing to say to God, God, what now? God, use me. God, I am available. You know, friends, the world's a big place. And God's not asking you to change the world. All God's asking you to do and all God's asking me to do is open up our eyes and open up our ears and open up our hearts and say, God, what now? What do you want me to do? How can I bring a little slice of what's happening up there down here? And I want you to think about your little corner of the world. We're gonna have a song sung right now. And I want you just to sit with an open heart and just ask God, God, what do you want me to do as you listen to this song?